No, the argument is against extreme rhetoric because it will reasonably and rationally drive people to violence, right? Like if you're telling people over and over and over again that, hey, you're being genocided, hey, you're being genocided, hey, you're being genocided, if people legitimately feel that they're being genocided, then it's not really that big of a stretch to be like, okay, well, we need to take up arms and start like killing people.
You have a problem with us calling it a trans genocide. What if we said a trans replacement or like similar things? Would you fight back equally as hard? Or would you say like, oh, okay, because like as long as you're not using the word genocide, then we're good? Would you happen to know the extent to which German citizens were aware of what was going on in regards to like the Holocaust and stuff like that? Because I understand that like Hitler was democratically elected.
Well, they definitely knew that something was happening though, right? Like,
there's no way that, I mean, if you think about it reasonably, there's no way that like an average German would have known about the death camps, but like the US invasion didn't know about it until we like started opening them up.
Why does it matter when we call something a genocide?
Well, it 100% matters. It's the same fundamental thing as the argument we had with Connor. Like, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If we're making claims about a group of people enacting the systematic extermination of a group of people, there has to be, even if we say that some group of people like died through consequence of a thing, in order to make the case that it was like intentional, it requires some amount of evidence. And it can be the case, Pixie, what you're talking about is we have like basically some circumstantial evidence or the preponderance of evidence that maybe individually doesn't point, it doesn't act as a smoking gun of intentionality. We can say collectively, like, reasonably, we can sort of infer that they were probably doing something fishy or something like that. But at the end of the day, we don't want to be calling things genocides willy-nilly if we don't have like really strong evidence for it. Because that's like like how do we watch out for that in the future? Yeah, there's like a lot of problems with that, with just like wanting to call things genocide willy-nilly. With the China thing, for example, we didn't really start using that term until we had like internal documents specifically saying like if these people escape the compounds, and they're using the term in Chinese. I looked over the source documents. They use the same term that they would use very explicitly for somebody who like was escaping like a situation like a prison or something like that.
Are you talking about the Uyghurs?
Yes.
Wicked?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And like the sort of externality to that, I guess, or at least the negative consequence might be that like a genocide may have occurred somewhere and it never officially gets recognized as a genocide because we never end up finding sufficient evidence of it. Maybe that happens, but the alternative is that we're also not implicating people and judging them and actually like trying them in the trials or in the annals of history or whatever for like conducting the worst crime imaginable if they didn't actually do it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like disagree with you. Or maybe there is some like very slight disagreement, just in the sense that I feel like there should be a level of policy enactment that's happening right now. And I'm not just saying one of the things. I'm saying like imagine if they're doing every single thing that's on the list of the United Nations when it comes to genocide, right? I think there should be a level where we can look at and being like, well, they're claiming that they're not doing it intentionally. But all these policies seem to be intentional. So I'm not like, I'm just saying like, oh yeah, like if you are trying to put everybody in like really bad conditions, sterilizing them, killing anybody who tries to escape, basically the conditions themselves are leading to the deaths of these people, then you really have to question at a certain point in time, oh, like, are these really for these X, Y random reasons that you're saying? Or are you just trying to eliminate them because that seems to be more likely in that scenario?
Like, could a genocide happen through gross negligence,
No.
not just intention?
No.
Is that what? No, but I'm saying, is that what Pixie's asking?
Sorry.
This is a really good question. I don't think so, but I think it would be easy for those people to claim that it's, or act like if it's from ignorance when it's not. Right? So unless if you have that internal documentation, I feel like it's very easy for people to claim like, I just didn't know at that time. And then it's like, oh, should we just like take their word for it? Or should we just look at the consequences of their actions? It just seems very convenient. That this is,
How
like,
is this? Why would this be
negligence.
different with genocide than any other crime?
What do you mean?
Like requiring a certain burden of evidence in order to like implicate somebody for a crime.
I I'm still not like you're saying like, oh, like when should we use it, or are you asking me why the standards of evidence might be different when it comes to genocide versus burden of crime?
That seems to be the
Or-
case that you're making. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm still unclear about what the exact question is.
Well, it seems to me that you are trying to make the case that we should lower the burden of evidence for the crime of genocide.
Oh, okay.
Am I wrong about that, or am I misunderstanding?
I feel like you're misunderstanding, but maybe I'm just being unclear. But yeah, no, like I'm not saying that the burdens of evidence should be lowered necessarily. I feel like it's just really weird for my brain to wrap around this concept because we don't do genocide, or we don't claim that genocide is happening the same way that we claim whether someone's guilty or not in trial, right? Like we didn't put China on the stand and like to determine like there's a genocide going right now with like the Uyghur Muslims.
No, but it's pretty clear. Like, so when you think of genocide or cultural genocide, before all this discourse happened, when someone said genocide, what did you think of?
The elimination of a group of people, or the permanent elimination, or attempting. I guess that's an attempting a genocide. But yeah.
And would you really have applied that if someone just said, so you went from that point of view and someone said, do you think trans people are being genocided? Would you have really said...
Wait, hold on. Before, to be clear, let me reiterate this a million times, because people keep saying this. Pixie's not claiming trans people are being genocided. I don't think that's ever been her argument. She just is arguing over what the responses can be to a perceived genocide, which is what the argument is over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then never mind. I thought this all came from the trans genocide thing.
Well, it started because it gave the idea of like, oh, like, because it's a topic point that once you start thinking about it, you think about all these like these different branches that you can go to. But I don't think a trans genocide is happening right now.
Oh, you're
Well,
laughing at it. That's funny. Trans people are being genocided and you're laughing?
I think that's the
Make it
contention
canceled.
around the subject in this space right now, is whether or not there is a trans genocide and whether or not people are misapplying the label of genocide. Because there's a certain idea that it evokes, and we can go down to definitions if we need to, but at the end of the day, what is happening to trans people in the United States, especially with the significant amount of progress they have, especially with the significant amount of social support they have, it's unreasonable to try to apply genocide to what is happening with some conservative bills here and there. So I feel like that's where this conversation originated from. And when it comes to genocide, because overall,
she knows where the conversation originated from, but the reason why she wanted to argue with me initially was because I said, and Lonerbox might have, or I was defending something that Lonerbox said, who's now creeping in here, because he made the statement that like, well, if you think that a trans genocide is happening, shouldn't you be like fighting, like being violent, like doing something to like fight against the people doing it? And I agree with that argument. If you think a genocide is happening, then I think that resisting through almost any means necessary is probably morally acceptable to do. And then Pixie came through and she basically wanted to argue that, well, like, couldn't we conceive of like some ways that a genocide is happening to where you wouldn't be able to like kill like a grandma down the block because she happens to be part of a country that maybe is committing a genocide? Like maybe that's not like the best way to go. Then that was Pixie's argument basically.
Yeah.
I mean, when the genocide's happening, it's even when people do take up arms, which is quite often, they don't usually go and just kill grandmothers, right? Like when the Jewish militias rose up against Nazi Germany, it was usually in Eastern Europe where the like concentration camps were, right? It's not like there were Jewish partisans running around fucking Munich like slaying fucking Helga and her 3 blonde daughters. It's was there an argument that it's okay to kill like civilians, just like random civilians, just because the genocide's happening, or what?
I think we got to a part in our argument where it's like there's probably some people that are more culpable than others. So like maybe not like random Joe Schmo, but like maybe politicians or like city leaders or whatever. But I guess for a democracy, it's going to be different than like an authoritarian regime. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The reason why I had trouble with your argument, Lonerbox, and this is, I guess, the most more like the principle of it all, is that if you're saying, okay, a genocide has happened, that means like it's morally, or as a response, it's morally necessary for people to like fight back, then you're kind of determining the definition of genocide by how people react to it. And I just didn't feel comfortable with that either, because it feels to me like even if in a random scenario, let's say people don't want to, for whatever reason, right? It doesn't even matter. They just don't want to kill other people back. And suddenly disavowing that as a genocide just doesn't sound right to me. So it sounds like the focus should not be on whether it's morally permissible for people to fight back or not. Because there is discussion to be had there. I think most of the times it is. I think sometimes it's not, but most of the times it is. But either way, that shouldn't determine whether there is a current genocide happening or not, because that should be focused on the perpetrator's actions, not on the supposed victim's retaliation.
I don't think that's an argument that anybody was making, though.
Yeah, it's the other way around. It's not like it's not determined by the reaction. It's determined by the description of what's happening. But the description of what's happening in a genocide is it necessitates or gives you the moral carte blanche to kill the fucking perpetrators. Yeah.
To defend yourself ultimately, or to defend somebody else.
Like the first thing you're going to do when there's a genocide is probably flee, right? But if you can't, or if you want to stay and protect your community, like I guess like the Rohingyas are doing in Myanmar, is like the only way you can do that is to kill people, or just like take up arms in some way, or destroy like supply lines, or just do like it's all very like
terrorism and shit, basically.
Is part of the argument, though, that because people are not availing themselves of that moral permission, that's evidence that it's not a genocide by definition?
No, the argument is against extreme rhetoric because it will reasonably and rationally drive people to violence, right? Like if you're telling people over and over and over again that, hey, you're being genocided, hey, you're being genocided, hey, you're being genocided, if people legitimately feel that they're being genocided, then it's not really that big of a stretch to be like, okay, well, we need to take up arms and start like killing people because holy we're being genocided. I think that's a pretty reasonable step.
Okay, because the way that it came across, at least with like the Loner Box video, and maybe this was just me misinterpreting, was that, oh no, if people aren't doing this, then doesn't it kind of prove or show that there isn't a genocide going on? And then that's when I was like, oh no, that's not good. But again, maybe I just like misinterpreted because there was a long video and there was a lot of stuff in it.
I mean, you could say it that way if you wanted to. I mean, like, I don't know if there's ever been a genocide in the past where people didn't end up just naturally fighting back by killing people or destroying stuff. So, but no, that's not really genocide's got like a description, and then the consequence of that description is people fighting back. Yeah.
Wow.
So now a question.
Wow.
Guys, we saw genocide. Yes? Okay, yeah, sorry.
Do you think that calling something a genocide, as in it's actively happening, should go hand in hand with an inherent call to violence?
No, I think, okay, this will sound really weird, but I promise that it's somewhere. I think when it comes to calling something I think when it comes to labeling anything, really, you should do it keeping in mind the consequences and the effects it's going to have afterwards, right? So I think if you're going to say like, oh, a genocide, like we're going to label this a genocide, then that's not necessarily an inherent call to violence, but it can be if you're saying that there's no other solution, basically, except to kill other people back, right? So if you're like, oh no, like they're attempting to genocide us, or, you know, a genocide's currently happening, and a call to, you know, only fighting back is it's the only way we're going to stop this, then yeah, that is an inherent call to violence. But if you're like, oh, but like this genocide is being like perpetrated because like not enough people are fighting back I can't pronounce the word, legislatively, then our focus should be on that. I feel like most of the times it will result in violence because it's already such an extreme action that's happening. But it's, I guess, I don't know if I'm about to misuse this phrase. It's not necessary. It's not like a necessary condition, if that makes sense.
Can you think of a hypothetical situation in which a genocide could be stopped through anything other than violent means?
I don't want to argue this specific line because I don't even believe in it. But if you are a trans person who thinks a genocide is happening right now, and you know that violence against the Republican Party is going to lead to like bigger backlash for your community and yourself, and probably for conditions to worsen, and if you believe in our democratic system and you think there's a way to fight against it, then you should be advocating for, you know, for more Democrats basically in office, or you should be arguing like for specific legislation, or trying to find a way to like pack more judges that are Democratic, that are less likely to rule in favor of like Republican genocidal legislator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I feel like that should be your call rather than like killing a bunch of Republicans, because I don't think you'll get what you want that way. I think you'll just end up endangering more trans people's lives, because like this is what kind of Republicans are salivating for. They're to show that like, oh, trans ideology is a violent one, not just to your children's selves, but to everybody, and it just promotes like this incredible like degeneracy or whatever. And I feel like it can radicalize like a lot of people.
Ixie, is that, just out of curiosity, is that a moral obligation on the part of the genocided party, or is that just a practical consideration, or both?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think in every action that you're going to do, you should think about how your, I guess, party, quotation marks, or the people that you're supposed to represent are going to be affected by those actions. So I feel like you do have a level of like moral duty and consideration to think like, okay, if I take this action, how is it going to affect everybody else in my community?
And Destiny, you disagree with that, because, or like you think that if somebody believes that if they're genocided, that they have a moral obligation to fight it by any means necessary, or do you think that they have a moral obligation to act within the system first?
Moral obligation to fight. It's hard to say. Well, before we were talking about morally justified, not morally obligated, right?
Gotcha.
Like if somebody is attacking you and they said they're going to kill you, like you might be morally justified in fighting back. I don't know if you're morally obligated to fight back, right?
Gotcha. Fair.
Stephen, so is your only problem with people saying or referring to it as like a trans genocide? Like you think using the word genocide is like wholly inappropriate, and like what would lead people to react violently?
Yeah, I think it leads to violence. I feel like the Canada should show that. But.
I feel like there's ways to allude to, or you can still dog whistle that genocide is occurring. Like this is the argument against like the Great Replacement, right? Like no, you don't actually have to say that white people are being genocided. You can even just like discussing the Great Replacement is kind of using like genocidal rhetoric, right?
But I could be wrong, but don't those types of people normally explicitly say white genocide?
I'm really not sure. That's why I'm trying to remember, like, I mean, of the few
I think they do. I think that's like a really common
like
phrase is white genocide, white genocide, white genocide.
Like Christchurch shooter manifesto had white genocide on the first page. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but don't the people that you talk to who believe in the, like, again, like somebody like Lauren Southern, she never says the word like white genocide or the phrase white genocide, right?
I don't want to get this wrong, but I would be surprised if she never used the phrase white genocide in any of her Great Replacement videos. It's possible she didn't, but I would be surprised if she hadn't. But if she didn't, she was still talking about like the exact same thing, I think.
Yeah, I don't think she did either. I think it was, but it's the idea that one logically leads to the other. Yeah.
Well, that's what Aaron was saying, that it could be, you know, the Great Replacement theory is a politically efficacious, unfortunately, it's been very effective at radicalizing people as a way of dog whistling and without coming out and saying genocide. So I guess Aaron's, you know, her counter proposal was, couldn't people who are sensitive to the issues that trans people are going through, even legislatively from the Republican Party in a variety of states, couldn't they do their own version of a dog whistle hinting at a trans genocide without coming out and calling it a trans genocide? And would Destiny support that kind of rhetoric?
Jesus. No. No, I don't think so. I just don't think it's effective. I don't like that the only way that we can communicate any political issue is to talk about violence and extremes and genocides and murder. Like we have to be able to like have conversations about these topics without it being like everybody needs to start firebombing everybody to get anything done.
I'm just trying to isolate the variable, because I think you were saying that your problem is just referring to it as like a trans genocide. So you take disagreement with using that turn of phrase, but I'm saying like it's possible to refer to a genocide anyway without even ever saying the word genocide, which is what I think a lot of these people who are discussing and propagating the Great Replacement conspiracy theory managed to do.
Sure,
just through dog whistling.
but I would disagree with that just as much then. What's the point of even floating that idea?
No, I was just trying to see if you disagreed with it just as much.
Yeah, well, I would, because the whole reason why I disagree with the white genocide thing is the same reason why I disagree with the trans genocide thing. You're basically saying that, like, okay, well, just so you guys know, the only action that you have that you can take right now is violence. All the other institutions have failed you, so go start killing people. That was my issue with the Great Replacement for white people, and that's essentially what people did. That's what the Christchurch shooter did. That's what the Buffalo shooter did. Like, that's what people are doing.
So what's another turn of phrase that you would find inappropriate to refer to like trans discrimination in the like globally or in the United States?
It's trans
like,
discrimination.
Said, like,
it's fine.
No, it's okay. But like I'm saying, if people said like, okay, you have a problem with us calling it a trans genocide. What if we said a trans replacement or like similar things? Would you fight back equally as hard, or would you say like, oh, okay, because like as long as you're not using the word genocide, then we're good?
I think if you
Trans
wanted to
replacement
invoke,
like doesn't
sorry.
even make sense. Like replacing who with what?
I know. That's why I'm saying it's weird to think of like a parallel that's like, or a rhetorical parallel to like the Great Replacement, in regards to trans people. But I'm just
You're just trying to find
see.
what his hard stop is, right? Because it's not just genocide. Like even certain.
Yeah, I
dog
just don't want people to
whistles.
feel like
Yeah.
violence is the only answer. That's the only thing that I want to avoid.
I see.
Do you?
I think there's a group called the Lemkin Institute, and they recently described gender critical ideology as a genocidal ideology.
Jesus Christ.
Which you can't, like, I mean, if you really want to, you can argue that, because a lot of them do actually say explicitly that they think being trans is like a fucking socially contagious mental illness that the world would just be better off without. And if you believe that, like, there are certain situations that could lead you into committing genocide, but then you have to caveat the by saying that there's like 1,000,001 institutional barriers between that rhetoric and actually the genocide happening, which is why it's still kind of useless. And people will say that even though you could probably safely describe someone like Hitler as genocidal as early as like early 1920s or 1919, but then people always have this fantasy of like, oh, what if we killed Hitler before the genocide? So that's the same idea. It's a bit, you're kind of playing with fire when you do that.
There was
Yeah, I
something
think
Loaderbox that you
definitely-
said. Oh, we'll continue, Pixie.
I was just gonna say, I definitely think Republicans are attempting to or want to build it up to that. I just think they're failing, I mean, maybe in Texas they have like 1 or 2 legislation that's passed that's like worrying, but I feel like overall, like, I'm very pessimistic when it comes to the Republican Party's future. I feel like the whole rhetoric that they're building is destined to fail, basically, because it's not resonating with anybody, and we're too interconnected now to like demonize people so easily, so effectively on a massive scale. But that's just my 3 cents.
I actually disagree, Pixie. I feel like the introduction of the term like groomer into the public lexicon has been like pretty swift. It's pretty strange.
Yeah, but is it really working for him?
I genuinely don't know. I don't know how that like polls among like Republican voters, or like general, like how common that's being used, or if people understand or accept that like groomer is basically being used in some right-wing circles to be synonymous with just like LGBT people. I don't know.
I feel like, if anything, like the midterms show that it's not like trans culture war issues are just failing en masse when it comes to Republicans. Maybe with the exception of a few states.
I would hope so. But it's strange because people can be on board with, like, people don't vote based off policy, right? Like, they vote based off of rhetoric. So I guess it would be, I don't think it would be too hard to imagine Republicans who are looking to run for office or something use the term groomer in this way and not be successful with their races. Like, it didn't happen in these most recent midterms, but I could easily see it continuing to happen because I feel like this word is only going to be used more and more.
Well, this midterm also had other things going for it, like severe election denialism, and so it wasn't like it'd be an interesting counterfactual to think of a situation where, you know, you didn't have the Carrie Lakes of the world and other people like that who were like just flat out denying, you know, the 2020 election and still like campaigning on that, and just so like take that variable out, but also include the, you know, anti-trans rhetoric that runs rampant with the party. And then I think, yeah, you could have an environment where they would have been much more successful. Like, I don't think it was anti-trans rhetoric that stopped the red wave. My understanding from the polls I read, it was they didn't want to deal with people saying that Trump won the 2020 election and that the whole thing was rigged. That was the crazy in the GOP that made them stumble, not, oh, they're calling trans people groomers and we don't like that.
I feel like it was a more broadly, more abstract thing, was just the general lack of focus on things that people care about as much in their day-to-day. But I could be wrong on that. Like, I feel like that's why, like, I'm curious, for the reason why DeSantis did so well, do you think it had to do with the COVID stuff?
I think absolutely did. I think everybody in Florida is like, oh yeah, like the freedom of being able to go outside.
Yeah. So that's what it feels like to me. So he had like a thing that he's like, what did I do? Like, did we talk about groom? Well, they did do the Don't Say Gay bill. He got that passed, but he could like point to some actual on the ground shit that like people across the entire United States were going to Florida for. Like, I let you guys have and enjoy a great amount of freedom in major cities during COVID, and maybe the only like major city like Miami, right? Because New York was locked down. Seattle was passports for getting into restaurants. LA and shit was locked down for a while, but Miami was like, we're at the beaches and didn't give a and I feel like it probably helped DeSantis rather than just like
they literally didn't know
like,
who the president was.
Yeah, like
Miami.
complaining about like election denialism and trans groomers and all that shit over and over again. I don't know if that helped as much as like his COVID policy. But again, I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it was like a perfect storm for DeSantis. I mean, number one, he had a favorable environment for it, right? Because Florida is a red state. Number two, he's a more polished version of Trump in the sense that he does lean in to culture war bullshit, like you said, the Don't Say Gay bill, and a lot of rhetoric surrounding that, and also politicizing vaccines and, you know, advice coming from like federal health agencies. But he does it in a way like where he's able to pitch it as policy, right? Like the perception, again, the polls that I read and a lot of the like the interviews that like CNN and, you know, Vox and other people did with people in Florida is like, you know, that DeSantis delivers results. He doesn't just bitch. He delivers results. So I think he's really good at that, like uniquely good at doing that.
I was gonna say I'm pretty scared about the indictments and shit that might be coming down for Trump, but now I'm starting to wonder. I feel like the saddest thing for Trump, for his life, is gonna be if those indictments do come down and like nobody really cares, like even Republicans, if they've all just kind of like moved on. That might be like the saddest fucking thing for that dude.
But they have in a lot of ways. Like I've talked to Republicans, including those in my family, and they're ignoring it outright. Like they don't want to read it, they don't want to see it. Even like the summaries that just say very blank verbatim, he did this, he did this, he did this, and they're clear this is, and any other person who ever did this would be a attack on our democracy. And they're just like,
oh no, when I mean ignored it, I don't mean stand by Trump. I mean like they've just kind of like moved on from Trump. I wonder if that's gonna happen.
Oh yeah, well I think that
does favor DeSantis. I mean, but we're still 2 years out.
Yeah, so much can happen. Yeah.
Well, yeah, DeSantis is. I mean, if that all happens and Trump can't run, like on one hand, it's like, yay, protect democracy, make sure he can't do it. That's what ought to happen. But then it's like, well, strategically, you know, the whole hope for Trump, the Republican vote and splitting it, that doesn't happen.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't really be relying on that to win the election, right?
No, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't, but it's just strategically something that, you know, we can amongst ourselves talk about and be like, yeah, that kind of sucks. That's out of the picture.
This new special, like, and have you been, I don't know if Destiny, you should, but have you guys been following the actions of the new special counsel that Merrick Garland appointed, Jack Smith?
No, for what?
To investigate Trump for the Mar-a-Lago documents and for January 6th.
No, I haven't. What's going on with that?
Dude, this guy, so this guy's no joke. He's a prosecutor that was loaned to the UN or the Hague to like prosecute Kosovo war crimes that, you know, Kosovo happened during the Clinton administration. And Garland tapped this guy to take over the investigation into Trump. And he like, it's funny. So Vice President Pence said that he would not testify in front of Congress because he didn't feel that Congress was entitled to his testimony, separation of powers, yada, yada. And then like 2 days later, Jack Smith sends him a letter saying, hey, we'd really like to sit you down for an interview and depose you. And so like every time, like he's acting fast. As soon as the vice president says, no, I'm not going to testify for the January 6th committee, Jack Smith's like, well, I'd like you to talk to me. He's impaneled a grand jury, I think for like Fulton County in Georgia, the you know, finding the 11,000 something votes, that phone call that Trump made to the election officials in Georgia. He's issued subpoenas to Trump allies in like Arizona and Colorado and a bunch. Like, this dude is acting very fast and very, very aggressively. I do think
He's
Trump
part of
will
the
be
deep
indicted.
state, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
That's what I heard.
yeah.
It really does feel like I guess my beat on the pulse is that Republicans really are just. It's not fun anymore for Republicans. Or
Yeah,
conservatives
exactly.
rather.
They just get kind of
It's just-
tired of it after a while.
The fiction has gotten stale.
Do you think that, Destiny, do you think the Trump simps that you argue with are going to swing their sail for DeSantis, like, and have some revisionist history? Oh, we were never really that big into Trump anyway. Like,
Well, I think it's a little bit different because I think Trump's biggest, there's a weird disconnect that I'm going to identify that might not actually exist, and I'm just super biased. But I think the people that support Trump the loudest online, I think, are some of the probably most politically disconnected people in terms of, like, they like Trump for a lot of things that they're going to continue to like Trump for. He says it like he is. He's like anti-SJW, blah, 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 blah. Which for young people, for young white people, for wealthy young white people online, that's like a really exciting, fun thing to talk about. And you could talk about that forever. But, like, whereas, like, the normal American public might start to get a little bit fatigued, even Republicans, where they're like, okay, like, this is kind of cringe, like, ready to move on. Like, the kids online probably still eat it up and probably still love it. Like, do you ever see, like, Sargon of Akkad being like, I don't know, man, Trump's getting a little cringe, I don't like him anymore. Like, I don't know if a person like that ever does it. Like, I feel like, if anything, those people would even, like, not like DeSantis. They'd be like, I don't know about DeSantis, he seems a little bit like too much of a political sellout or something. But I could be wrong.
I don't think Sargon's a good metric just because he's not an American, so he wouldn't vote.
Well, but, like, think about, like, Tim Pool. Is Tim Pool going to come out against Donald Trump?
Neither is Steven Crowder.
Or Steven Crowder? Like, it feels like these are, well, actually, Crowder might
Oh
be
wait,
a little.
Crowder is.
What?
Crowder is an American.
Yeah. Oh no, Crowder's Canadian, isn't he?
He has a dual
Correct.
citizenship. He's part Canadian, part American.
You don't get dual citizenship with Canada, okay? If you're a dual citizen with Canada, you're Canadian, okay?
You're American at that point. Like,
I
think all
have
the
dual
actors-
citizenship with Canada.
Well, no, think about all the actors. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, once you get American citizenship, I think you're pretty much considered American. No one thinks of Jim Carrey as a Canadian. Like, they know he's Canadian.
I would if he
but-
started talking U.S. politics.
There's more of an argument for Crowder because my understanding is that he was born in the United States, but he spent the majority of his life in Canada.
That makes him more of a Canadian.
Loser.
True. He's more in touch with that side of his citizenship, is all I'm saying.
Where has he
think
lived for the
anybody-
past 10, like, that's what I would want to know, honestly, if I'm interpreting that.
I'm really skeptical that it's anywhere other than Texas. I think he's been in the United States, like, at least for the last decade, but, like, the majority of his, like, childhood, I think I read on his Wikipedia once, from like 5 to like even college or something like that. He was like spent time in Canada, and then he came to the United States to do.
Oh,
his
is he in
political
America
stuff.
right now?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I thought he was in Canada. Oh, fuck it, he's an American. If you live here, screw it.
In America.
Gross.
I don't think that these, like, Tim Pool, the Sargon of Akkad types are going to disavow Trump, but I think they're going to start shifting their rhetoric and, like, just throwing their weight behind DeSantis without ever talking shit, especially because they had, like, insane predictions related to him. Like, I think Tim Pool said that there was going to be a 50-state landslide for Trump, right?
Yeah. One of the
So, like,
legendary
for him to disavow
predictions.
Trump, he's, like, talking shit about himself at that point, because it's like, how could you go so hard in the other direction? Like, what could have happened in that time? Because Trump is still pretty popular. When you poll among, like, the GOP and, like, constituents, I think electorally, I don't know how well that's going to bear out for him in this upcoming presidential election, but they're not completely done with Trump yet. But I do see the Republican Party, just because DeSantis had so much success. I think I read somewhere that, like, his margin of victory was the state's largest in, like, 40 years, something like that, maybe 50. So
Yeah, and it's
Well,
crazy
awesome.
because when he was elected in like 2018, like it was by a slim, like it was by the skin of his teeth.
yes.
And he has maximized in 4 years some considerable gains. It really
Yeah,
was.
I think if I had to talk about like how the rhetoric is going to shift, at least seeing my parents who are like Trump supporters and stuff like that, but love this.
Wait, mom's a Trump supporter?
Mom is less of a Trump supporter. Mom is like let's call her a centrist for now. Yeah, dad has been a Trump supporter, but I think the rhetoric is literally just going to shift to Trump being selfish. Obviously, we all think he's selfish, but it's going to focus more on that. Like, oh no, you should like let DeSantis take over. Like, he did really well. Like, if you're not doing it, it's just because your ego is too big. Like, oh, you're just being selfish, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like if they're going to throw him under the bus, it's just going to be honed in on that, on just like, oh, like, it's this DeSantis is younger. It's like his time to shine. You already had your spotlight as presidency, shit like that.
And I've even seen, I think DeSantis understands that the right is not, or like the American GOP party is like not done with Trump, obviously, because I've seen these like freaky videos where he's trying to mirror his hand gestures, even the way that he speaks. So he understands he still needs to capture these voters entirely.
100%. I'm gonna find, while you guys talk about this, DeSantis ran the creepiest campaign ad. It may have been in 2018 when he was running for governor, and he was like, it was all Trump related. He was reading his kid like a storybook about King Trump or something. Like, it was the creepiest shit in the world.
What the fuck?
You guys not remember this?
Nope.
No.
Oh my god. Okay, continue on. I'll find it. I'll link it.
The person who I remember like really just castigating themselves for Trump was Cruz. Like, Trump literally accused him. He accused that his father killed JFK.
Oh, no. The JFK thing was whatever. I thought it was him attacking Cruz's wife, where it was like, bruv. I think he said it looked. Didn't he say it looked like the Zodiac killer, or was it the JFK thing? Yeah, I don't know. That was some funny shit.
He literally.
Wait, speaking of which, did you see somebody tweet of was it like something happy birthday Ted Cruz to the Zodiac killer, and it was a Republican who tweeted it, and he was like, it's a joke. Okay, that's the second thing I gotta find. That's the second thing I gotta find.
Jesus.
While he finds that, going way back, old memes.
Destiny, I also sent you the link to a 30-second DeSantis campaign ad, the one where he's reading Trump shit to his kids. It's really weird. It's good. So good.
Everyone knows my husband Ron DeSantis is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad.
Did we watch
Ron
that on stream?
loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
I just thought you should know.
Ron DeSantis for governor.
Jesus Christ. Nice.
Real?
It indeed seemed to be real.
I also heard people talking about genocide, so I was like,
it's like that signal for you.
Yeah.
Loaderbox, can I just say, in your video, one of the most disturbing things that you said was that you were like, there could, it was disturbing for me to learn because like my Holocaust history and like World War II history is like not the best. But you said that there could be genocidal rhetoric for like several years before an actual genocide is enacted or starts occurring. And I think you said you're like, for example, like Jewish people were referred to in like anti-Semitic ways publicly. And like, so quote unquote genocidal rhetoric was used for like 10 years before. And it's like, Jesus, like the idea of like, you know, from like year one, there's anti-Semitic rhetoric and just like less than 10 years, the final solution is like being implemented was like actually disturbing for me to learn.
Well, to be clear,
they
like,
didn't go from anti-Semitic rhetoric was pretty old, right?
Yeah,
like,
they didn't go from zero to Holocaust.
Didn't happen. Yeah, like Jews were second-class citizens in Germany until like 1871, I think, and then the immediate backlash was a bunch of new anti-Semitic parties that only kind of started to stop being a problem towards the early 1900s. And the First World War happens, and they all blame Jews for the loss. So, yes.
Well, yeah, anti-Semitic rhetoric or like language had been around, but do you know if it had only been within the last 10 years that it was like acceptable to use it? Like openly and publicly to kind of abandon the dog whistle and just start overtly being anti-Semitic as like a politician or something?
I think in Germany, Jews had like a very brief period of like breathing space from early 1900s until the First World War. But then as soon as the war happened and Germany started losing, that was like straight from 1918. It was like they were blamed for the loss in the war. The German Supreme Court, after the Kaiser abdicated, was like full of anti-Semites and yes, it was acceptable from about like the end of the war onwards or late in the war, I think. Pretty sure that's
okay, like so 1918, and what year did like the first concentration camp open?
First concentration camp was 1933, but that was for like political opponents, although a disproportionate amount of those opponents were Jews.
See, so like even just 15 years of that's a pretty insane timeline. I don't know, that's really short to me to go from like open discrimination all the way to like planned extermination and like deliberate elimination of like a minority.
Yeah, and it's also the way things accelerate in different ways. Because I think if you went to the 20s and you wanted to pick out the country that was most likely to commit genocide against Jews, you probably would have said France over Germany, because of like the Dreyfus affair, and like one of the reasons France lost so quickly to Germany was because a bunch of them were really just complacent about Nazis coming in. Yeah, but I guess that's like all of Europe was like that, like all over. Like Russia was like that, the UK was like that. Yeah.
Would you happen to know the extent to which German citizens were aware of what was going on in regards to like the Holocaust and stuff like that? Because I understand that like Hitler was democratically elected, but was it like an open secret, or was there a lot of ignorance on the part of Germans who even supported the Nazi party that there were like genocidal policies being enacted to that extent, or were people just completely ignorant?
So one of the reasons that Hitler, you know how Hitler didn't order the Holocaust on paper, you know that meme?
Yeah, he didn't actually say it. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason he actually gave a lot of his orders by word of mouth by that point, because in 1939 he ordered to euthanize, was the word they used, just kill, like 1/3 mentally ill and disabled people, and that was Action T4. But that was actually really unpopular. The Catholic Church spoke out against it. I think there were actually protests as well across Bavaria against that action, and yeah, Hitler was just like, it wasn't a very popular move to kill that many people, or just to order the killing of people like in the open like that. So after that, Hitler started giving a lot more of his more wacky orders, like off the record. So it's, I think there's an article I read about it a while ago that taught, but yeah, I don't think that many people in Germany knew that much about it. Yeah.
Because
Well, they definitely knew that something was happening, though, right? Like,
There's no way that, I mean, if you think about it reasonably, there's no way that like an average German would have known about the death camps, but like the U.S. invasion didn't know about it until we like started opening them up, right? There's no way that it would have been that widespread, but also that well contained at the same time.
So to what extent
They
are
did
those
know about
Germans
certain
morally
aspects,
critical?
right?
They might have
well,
known.
they knew
I
if they
don't know.
had hid a Jewish person, that it probably would mean that they would be caught as complacent, like possibly die, right? Like that was like the common practice, right? If you were caught hiding a Jew, you were basically dead. Or am I just wrong about this?
Well, real quick, as far as the question of like German like population moral culpability, one of the, Lonerbox, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought Hitler he wasn't elected, he was appointed. I thought by Hindenburg.
Well, I think they won it, didn't they? Didn't the party win a majority, like a popular vote by quite a lot? But
I know, like there was the Reichstag fire, you know, where like they consolidated their power within the Reichstag, but I don't think he was ever like. I mean, I could be wrong. I
To a certain extent, he was, but then he seized and took the position of High Chancellor. He basically gave that to himself, right?
You have to, you need to also figure out what was their electoral system at the time, because like some people just don't elect heads of state. I think that's pretty rare that somebody actually elects their head of state.
Yeah, was it a parliament?
So when you say like, wasn't he just appointed? Like, I mean, like that's how most parliaments across Europe do their
not appointed.
There was
like,
head of state and head of government. There were two
Uh-huh.
different positions. You had the president, you had the chancellor. He was chancellor. Hindenburg was president. I thought Hindenburg was elected. I thought the president was elected. Then Hindenburg dies in like 33 or 34, and then Hitler just like absorbed his position, just like his powers, and then became Führer. That's my understanding. But I was also educated in rural Kentucky, so who knows?
Somebody said Hitler came to power in democracy, and a democracy is the Nazis gained seats in the Reichstag, I don't know how to pronounce this. But he was never elected president in a democratic election. Hitler was appointed chancellor in 1933, then became president and chancellor by decree in 34 after the Nazis gained power through democratic and non-democratic means over the course of the 20s and early 30s.
Yeah, he won a majority in the federal election in 1932 by I think it was like 5 million votes. But by that point, I think the Germans, it's to do with the German Supreme Court. I think the way that they kind of fucked over a lot of the electoral process. I can't remember much of the details, but like throughout the late 20s, early 30s, they were kind of like shutting down lots of opportunities for voting and consolidating power across like a smaller range of areas.
Wow.
So kind of democratically elected, but definitely not like democratically, given the mandate to be chancellor and shit.
Right. But the Holocaust is widely understood. Well, like, I think the Nuremberg trials are like the UN only had kind of like I don't know what you would call it, like a meeting or a resolution to kind of determine what the legal definition of genocide would be because of the Holocaust, right? Like how to categorize this historical tragedy.
I feel like I've read in 3 different areas. I've heard that Holocaust was designed, the term was to describe what happened to the Jews. I've heard it's to describe what happened to the Armenians, and then I've also heard that it's to describe what happened to the that the early guy wanted to talk about the Holodomor. I don't know where it actually. I would have to go and dig through, but I've heard all 3 of those given as like this is the event that inspired somebody to even come up with the term genocide.
So he was a student when he learned about Armenia, and then that was kind of what set him on the path of looking at all these old events that didn't really have a name. And then the Holocaust was kind of what brought the UN into it, and then he was kind of like the one who campaigned to get it enshrined into international law.
Gotcha.
I don't know much about his contribution for I think his contribution for the Holodomor would be that thing you were talking about earlier with intent and gross negligence, is that I think the original guy wanted it to be the case that it didn't have to be like special intent. You could also be willingly allowing a destructive course to carry on. So like the Irish famine wasn't intentionally caused, but Irish people will say that it was a genocide on the grounds that the legislators said that it should be allowed to carry on, partly because of like free market economics, but also because they just thought it was a good way to get rid of undesirables. They thought it was like God wiping them out, the shitheads or whatever. So same with, so like Holodomor's a similar argument. Yeah.
Okay, so here's my question about this, because this is like, again, I remember having arguments with but like, where do you all rank, like, where do you all make those evaluations? Do you put more emphasis on intentionality than gross negligence if the body count is still pretty lopsided? Do you think that they're comparably bad, all 3 of them?
I feel like when you think of genocide conceptually, the intention, the individual actions don't require the intention, but there should be like an overall intent to eliminate a group of people, right? So if you see that like a meteor is coming towards like X plantation or X like reservation or X area in like your country or whatever, and you know that all of these people live there, and you're like, I really want them to die, let them die, then in a way that's kind of like a genocide, because the goal is to have them die, even if you're not intentionally throwing the meteor at them, but that's kind of like the way that it goes. Like your goal is the elimination of a group of people, kind of.
Okay, here was my biggest contention, I guess, kind of looking at it solely from the side of intention, like you're saying, Stephen, is that like, is it possible to have a genocide of only like 40 people, 30 people?
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah?
If your
How
goal
low
is...
could it go?
Well, like if you're, I mean, like, yeah, it sounds silly, but let's say there's like one guy left of like an ancient like ethnic tribe or some shit, and you're like, I really want to kill that guy because my goal, yeah, you could technically genocide that one person, yeah.
I just wondered like if there's ever a point where you're like, no, that's too few people, that you would just call that like a mass killing or something like that, but not a genocide, even though like the intent, like, or if it's really just about like, no, we're intentionally looking to eliminate this group, and something can be a genocide with as few as like 5 people. But like the mass killing, I guess through negligence of like 50 or so people of a demographic, I guess, could maybe technically not be. That's a genocide.
Well, the reason why I don't like to say just negligence is because like, let's say that you see like a group of people starving and you're like, fuck it, like let them die. Like, I don't think that would be a genocide in the same way that like there's a group of people starving, you're like, oof, we really want those people to die. Like, let's like that's good. Like there's like a different feeling to like wanting a group of people to be eradicated versus like just kind of like letting a group of people being eradicated but not caring if they're eradicated or not. I don't know if that makes sense. For me,
no,
like
it
the
does.
thing,
like if a state understands that and they don't intervene when they have the ability to, and you just allow people to starve, that's effectively.
But it's a difference between like allowing them versus
right?
like allowing and wanting them to. I feel like it's a difference, but I don't know.
I think in the UN, it's like it would be the action of, in that situation, it would be the action of like blocking humanitarian aid from bringing food.
Yeah,
there,
that would be one. Sure.
For that reason. I sent
like
an article about your question straight away with the ordinary Germans and the final solution.
I feel like the stuff that I read for the Holodomor that was rough was that like the idea of like requisitioning food from like cities, like stealing food from them and then shooting to death people that try to like escape and shit. Like that seems like really like a group of people is like being destroyed and like people aren't even allowed to flee without you killing them. And then how much contention existed between people like in Moscow versus like Ukraine is like up for debate. I've seen like different things on that, but like those kinds of actions like sell me on like it being like a pretty thing that's more than just like, well, they just happen to be dying, you know, because they were starving and it was just a famine, you know.
So Loner Box, do you know if there's, my understanding is that there's not historical consensus that the Holodomor is a genocide, right?
Yeah, there's not.
I think
so with that thing about, sorry, go on.
well, just I think the EU last month, even in November, did declare it to be a genocide, but I think that they're one of the only countries to recognize it as such. I could be wrong. So I think maybe that's going to start trending that way, that like genocide, the current definition of genocide as it stands is inclusive enough of what happened with the Holodomor to consider it a genocide, but I don't know.
Yeah, the problem is that it's always, it's like, whether people decide something's genocide or not is also a lot to do with politics, right? Like the reason cultural genocide, or one of the big reasons that wasn't included in the UN definition, was because every country would have been guilty of it at some point, right? In the Security Council. So that's kind of a thing as well. But that thing about with the Holodomor, it's that whole thing about whether it's special intent or not. It's whether or not you caused the thing, or whether or not you're allowing it to continue on purpose.
In order to eliminate like an ethnic group of people or whatever, right? Yeah.
So I think if you want to say the Holodomor, it's like the international law as it stands now wouldn't agree with that, but historians definitely would. They're a lot less lenient when it comes to intentionality and that kind of thing.
I see. I feel like that kind of demonstrates that maybe like the definition of genocide as it currently stands is not, I don't know, want to say like encompassing enough, or like should be expanded, or I don't know if like Lonerbox, do you think right now under the current working definition that the UN has determined for genocide, that's enough to say the Holodomor was a genocide?
I don't think it is. I think you need to change the meaning of intent a little bit. But I'd be in favor of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was bringing up before that maybe this is just like a language game when it comes to defining intent. Because when we think about intent, we think about, okay, like these clear reasons why you're doing something. But if it seems like if all your actions are pointing towards this reason, but you're not explicitly stating it, then maybe that's enough to claim intent, and saying that people claiming otherwise are just being dishonest about their intent. But I'm not sure.
There's another thing that you brought up, Lonerbox. You said, like, even describing the term genocide, like, descriptively, right, there's observing how it's used right now, I guess, colloquially, in both, like, how the UN defines it, but then, I guess some people that you had debates with, right, were trying to, like, make a different, like, prescription for how it ought to be used. But do you agree currently, like, with the UN's definition of genocide?
I agree with it more than the one that my my colleagues, my contemporaries are, yeah, because. Yeah, I agree much more with the UN definition than what they're saying. But even, I mean, they tried to do the thing where if you use the old definition, like the old cultural genocide definition, then that's what lets it in. But I'm like, it really doesn't. Like, if you go to Eastern Europe, I was in Riga not long ago, like, they'll just call everything the Soviet Union did to them a genocide. Because, like, in a cultural sense, it definitely was. Like language bans, killing intellectuals and thought leaders, like like jailing people for things like just speaking out publicly against the regime. So there's a big case there, but when you talk about the United States, like the reason they're doing it is because they read the 10 stages of genocide. They didn't bother to elaborate, to read the elaborations on what each point is, where they even say in 10 stages, like stage 8 is when the genocide starts. They say 7 is planning, and the example they use is the final solution. So, like, but they've just said that, well, once it's on the 10 stages, we should just call it that because we don't want to, wait till it's too late and some retarded shit like that.
Whoa.
Sorry.
R word. Careful.